Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. This week, a new report showed some of the largest drinking water systems in our state are contaminated with harmful chemicals called PFAS. It comes after federal regulators set new limits on the amount of these chemicals allowed in drinking water back in the spring. WRAL climate reporter Liz McLaughlin is here to break down that report and tell us where these cleanup efforts stand. Liz, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I feel like whenever we talk about PFAS, we always have to remind people what these are, where we see them. So what are PFAS?
So stay with me here. It's an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Most people know them as forever chemicals, and they're called that because they don't naturally break down in the environment, in our bodies, and they're used in nonstick cookware, waterproof coatings, rain jackets, waterproof mascara, firefighting gear, even fast food packaging like pizza boxes. About 99.9% of humans, even newborns, have PFAS in their blood. But some of the most dangerous exposure really happens when it's in drinking water. People can get really high levels of these toxic chemicals in their bodies.
And what are these limits that the federal government set? I remember we talked about this back in the spring.
Yeah, in April, the EPA set limits on 6 types of forever chemicals, including these kind of legacy chemicals, PFOA, PFAS, that have now been phased out, but they're forever chemicals, so they're still around.
Right.
Gen X, which you may have heard of, made here in North Carolina. And basically, the more scientists are learning about these chemicals, the more toxic they are. But they chose 6, even though there's 13,000 of these chemicals, because there's the most science behind it. It's impossible to do a really robust, scientific study on each one of those PFAS. But this has the most, so basically they can regulate this with the least chance of litigation.
Okay, and so with all of that in mind, let's talk about this new data that came out on Wednesday. Where does that show the highest level of contamination around our state?
Okay, so we already know that the Wilmington area, New Brunswick, had tainted drinking water. It's actually the 7th anniversary of when the public found out that Chemours, formerly DuPont, plant in Fayetteville, dumped chemicals into the Cape Fear River, contaminating the drinking water in pretty much the whole southeastern part of the state, and that includes wells, public drinking water systems, etc.
Right.
But now we're learning more and more as we're doing testing that it's in a lot more drinking water systems than we thought. 300 drinking systems across the state, at least 50 above these new limits that the EPA set. And by the way, these chemicals, it's not a light thing here. They've been linked with immune system problems, reproduction, development, liver and kidney problems, even cancer. So this is not something you want in your water at high levels. Let's see. The new report is from Environmental Working Group. They found North Carolina's largest utilities had the PFAS levels above the limits, including the city of Durham and the Fayetteville Public Works Commission. Now, we knew this in Fayetteville, but when people had contaminated wells, a lot of people said, well, let's get them on city water. Well, the city water is tainted too.
Right.
Robeson County had some of the highest levels in the state. And also Orange, Chapel Hill, which is Orange Water and Sewer, they had 11 different PFAS in one of their reservoirs. So that's Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Burlington and Pittsboro too also had some high levels. And we've discovered recently that there is industrial pollution. This is upstream from Chemours, from Elevate Textiles, and they're learning about more and more that are kind of dumping it into the water there.
And so these areas that do have the high levels, how big of an issue is that?
So Governor Cooper's office says that there are water systems across the state, as many as a third, that are contaminated, that it will need to do upgrades, to make this water safe. That's a lot. And while it's great there's a push to make the water safer, many are asking to stop pollution at the source, because just saying that utilities have to clean up the water is just going to be very expensive. So, and the Environmental Working Group identified more than 700 potential industrial dischargers that are putting PFAS into the water across the state. And that can even include things like firefighting foam, airports that are using PFAS, in sludge that's being spread from waste systems, things like that. So companies can keep putting these chemicals in the water, and residents are footing the bill to clean it up.
All right, let's take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. Liz, before the break, you were explaining some of what's going to have to go into the cleanup process here. And you mentioned Governor Cooper. I know that you spoke to him on Tuesday. What was your conversation with him like with relation to PFAS?
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. You good?
This is something that has plagued our state for a long time, and our conversation really centered around the current debate over who should pay for this problem.
Are the polluters going to pay, or are everyday people, when they get their water bill, going to pay? And that's what this dispute at the Environmental Management Commission is about.
They say everyone in North Carolina and America deserves clean water, and it's kind of sad, frankly, that this is an issue in 2024 in one of the richest nations in the world. And I've talked to so many people in North Carolina who are really suffering from health issues, who've lost loved ones, who've had dogs die from cancer, who have been drinking this water, seen their house values drop because of tainted water. And in many parts of the state, they've lived on bottled water for years, very inconvenient, or have been consuming these chemicals for years and have no idea. And Cooper is saying, enough already. He's made a very conscious effort to push action on this, litigation to hold, Chemours accountable for contaminating the southeast part of the state. And the EPA actually made that announcement of those standards here in North Carolina, in Fayetteville. So he said he's frustrated to see pushback now after all that progress because clean water seems like a bipartisan issue.
Right. And what is it that the Republicans are holding this up, or that certain bodies of government are holding these efforts up?
It's recently gotten really spicy and really interesting for something usually so in the weeds politically. But the federal drinking water standards, we knew were coming down the pipeline for quite some time. And DEQ, in conjunction with that, had been working for 2 years on a proposal for ground and surface water limits, basically trying to stop the PFAS pollution at the source. So I talked to Secretary Beiser, and she put it very simply. She said the less contamination that goes into the water supply, the less effort and expense will be required to remove it before it reaches our faucets. Seems kind of like a no-brainer. Well,
Sure.
Last month, the North Carolina Chamber writes this letter to the DEQ pushing back on these rules and asking for a delay. This raised some eyebrows because the letter spoke for the entire business community, and their members even include Duke Health, RTI, who have done extensive research on the health harms of PFAS. So I reached out to the chamber, and they wrote back with a statement, and they said the chemical companies have been acting responsibly, which was kind of interesting verbiage because Chemours also says that on their websites, that they're responsible stewards of this chemistry. If we look at the data, the dumping in the Cape Fear River, there's a lot of evidence that there's been actions that aren't considered responsible.
Sure.
So I asked them if they had received financial contributions from PFAS manufacturers, and radio silence, no answer. And I gave them days to respond, asked them multiple times. They also included Chemours on a manufacturing tour last year, but since scrubbed that from their website. So after that, at last month's Environmental Management Commission meeting, 2 Republican-appointed members of the EMC stalled a vote on that rule. So, and this wouldn't pass the rule, mind you. It would just start the process for a 1.5-year long process of putting in place that stopping pollution at source.
Right. Sort of, this would have just been the first step in getting the ball rolling, if anything.
Exactly.
Right. So, do we have any sense of what's behind any of this? Is it just they feel like these businesses need more time?
Well, it's worth noting the legislature took away the majority of the governor's appointments to this commission last year.
We believe that that is unconstitutional. But right now that is in litigation, and right now there are a majority of Republican legislator-appointed members of this commission. Our Department of Environmental Quality has put forth a plan saying that we need to stop these chemicals at the source. But the commission is now stalling on that. The Chamber of Commerce wrote them a letter and saying, we don't want to hear about that yet. We need some more time on this.
So Tim Bungardner and Joseph Reardon are the lawmakers who stalled that vote. And they had really strong words at the meeting I was listening in. They called pushes to curb PFAS pollution grandstanding and threatened to remove the agenda item entirely if they didn't get certain documents a certain time period in advance. And they wanted like a fiscal note, which usually comes later in the rulemaking process and from the budget office, not the DEQ. And part of the rulemaking process is these stakeholder meetings where businesses could, give feedback. Public could give feedback before anything was implemented.
Right.
And they're saying they want more informational sessions, but this next meeting will be their 5th such session. So they've really had ample time here to ask questions, to get information. And essentially, they're saying they don't have enough information, they don't have enough documents, but they could keep saying that meeting after meeting, essentially making these rules dead in the water.
So where does that leave us for people who, like you talked about, just want to have clean drinking water, have maybe had issues potentially related to PFAS? And, is there a timeline for when we could start to see these efforts pick back up?
Well, if you want to weigh in on that rule about polluters or companies being able to discharge PFAS in the water, the next meeting, Environmental Management Commission meeting is July 10th, and the public can attend either online or in person.
Okay.
I think the first step individually is just knowing what's in your water. So you can check out our website. We have a lot of results. DEQ has a lot of results, or just going to your utilities website. Usually they have some PFAS levels, or just getting your water tested. There's a pretty inexpensive kit called CycloPure that'll test for 55 different kinds. I think it's $75, 1 week turnaround. Just knowing what's in there is kind of a good first step. But some utilities, like I said, WRAL, Carry, are already under the threshold, so you might not need to do anything. If your water does have PFAS in it, in a couple of years, all the utilities will have to comply. But in the meantime, you can get a filter, kind of a Britter type filter if you want, kind of a temporary solution, or a reverse osmosis system that would go under the sink. That's like a few $100s. That might be something to do in the meantime that can filter out this, most of the PFAS there. Even a refrigerator filter will take some of it out, not all of it. But you can search PFAS even on Amazon and find a lot of different filter options. But really, because of all this controversy around that other rule, that might mean less money in the pockets of ratepayers, because utilities are having to make those moves to upgrade their systems now. And if we're at least 2 years behind stopping polluters from dumping chemicals in the water, then the cleanup, they have to move forward, with building these systems, these filters, which can be $100 million, which can be a significant cost on your water bill. So that cleanup cost really might fall on consumers. And it's especially important in places like Durham because they're kind of on the cusp of the limit. And something like that, if there was just a little less PFAS in the water, they just might not have to install one of those. That could be in the difference between having to install an expensive system, raising water bills, or not.
All right. Well, definitely a lot to think about, and a lot of things that people can do in their own lives and own homes to try to take some steps on this. Thank you, Liz, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting in your inbox every morning with local news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.